After hiring a ship and rounding up a crew, of sorts, retired Admiral Jean-Luc Picard is en route to Freecloud, the last reported location of missing cyberneticist Bruce Maddox, whom you may remember from the TNG episode The Measure of a Man. Before getting to Freecloud, however, he has a side quest, a detour to the planet Vashti, which served as a safe haven for Romulans fleeing the supernova of their home system a number of years previously. During the heyday of the Federation's involvement in assisting in the evacuation of the Romulan system, the planet was full of promise and hope for a brighter future. Unfortunately, in the years since, it has devolved into a backwater filled with ethnic tensions and political strife. Picard's goal on Vashti is to procure the services of a member of the Coat Millat, a sect of Romulan warrior nuns who adhere to the way of absolute candor, which is described as total communication of emotion without filter between thought and word. This, of course, flies in the face of the more stereotypical tendency of Romulans to engage in intrigue and subterfuge. Living with the Coat Millat on Vashti is Elnor, a young male Romulan whom Picard befriended years earlier. Contrary to his promises to continue to assist with the evacuation and resettlement efforts, as well as his promise to help find Elnor a new home, Picard instead abandoned the mission when the Federation pulled out of the relief efforts following the synth attack on Mars. Upon Picard's return to Vashti all these years later, he is confronted with a disenchanted Romulan populace who resents Picard and what he represents. Elnor himself, upon hearing Picard plead his case, refuses to bind himself to the quest due to the betrayal he felt when Picard didn't return in his youth. However, when Picard finds himself on the wrong end of a Romulan sword in a local tavern, Elnor defends him, killing his Romulan assailants and declaring himself to be Picard's Kalan Kai, binding his sword to Picard's cause. Before they can be gunned down, Rios beams them aboard La Serena. However, they are not out of the woods yet, as a local warlord, Candor, has arrived with his flagship, an old surplus Romulan bird of prey. La Serena manages to hold her own against the powerful vessel for a time, but soon the tide turns. Another ship enters the fray, a vessel belonging to the Fenris Rangers, the closest thing the region has to any kind of official authority. The Ranger vessel helps La Serena disable the bird of prey, but not before taking critical damage. Just before the ship is destroyed, Rios beams the pilot aboard. It is 7 of 9, formerly of the USS Voyager, who collapses unconscious. When I started this review project, the first time back in 2016, it was for a Star Trek universe that consisted primarily of standalone episodes and no major season-long arcs, with one exception. However, in this new era, we have a number of Trek series that feature a single story drawn out over an entire season, which makes this sort of non-chronological rewatch a little bit tricky. Nonetheless, this is the task I've set before myself, so please bear with me, even though some of the episodes I talk about will require a bit of greater context. This is definitely the case with Absolute Candor, episode 4 of Picard's first season. The first 3 episodes served primarily as setup, in which we learn about the android twins, Daj and Soji, and Picard's quest to rescue Soji after Daj is killed by a Romulan sect called the Zhat Vash. Absolute Candor is one of the better episodes of Picard's first season. Now that the mission of the season is finally underway, we spend some time getting to know the characters, and most of this exploration is delightful. Michelle Hurd shines as Raffi, who's clearly irritated by Picard, but still driven by a need to get to Freecloud for her own personal reasons. She also clearly cares for Jean-Luc and continually tries to remind him of his own limitations. Picard himself is on a season-long journey to rediscover himself. After being forced to resign from Starfleet, he never returned to Vashti, nor to Elnor, who feels a deep betrayal at this. Much like the Federation itself, Picard entered a period of isolation, hiding himself away at his vineyard, and there have been consequences. Early in the episode, Zani, Picard's contact in the Coat Millat, states that a promise is a prison. Picard has made many promises, most of which he did not keep. He has since found that those prisons he created jailed not only himself, but people he cared about as well. Although he sees how his decisions have caused hurt to those around him, by the end of the episode he grossly overcorrects when he provocatively tears down a Romulan's only sign on a local drinking establishment and takes a seat. This is very much a Picard trait. Upon seeing injustice, he confronts it head-on. Although his heart is in the right place, his usual strategy of making a stirring speech and bringing enemies together fails in this instance, and it is only thanks to the timely intervention of Elnor that Picard's life is saved. This comes at the cost of the life of a former Romulan senator, as well as those of his goons, and Picard is angry at Elnor for taking their lives. However, some of the guilt for their deaths should be laid at Picard's feet as well. One aspect of the episode that I haven't really mentioned is the B-plot, the continued seduction and manipulation of Soji by the Romulan Narek aboard the Borg cube, dubbed the Artifact. Not very much happens to advance this plot in Absolute Candor, although we do learn about more questions surrounding Soji's past, and get a bit of an insight into what Narek and his sister are trying to accomplish. There just really isn't much to say here, as this plot seems to be treading water, just waiting for Picard and his gang to catch up to it. I will say, however, the scene in the ventilation shaft where Narek introduces Soji to an ancient Borg ritual was somewhat delightful, and featured some of Michael Chabon's trademark whimsy. The exploration of Romulan culture. Up to this point, even though Romulans have been a part of Star Trek since nearly the very beginning, we haven't gotten very much in-depth examination of their culture. Star Trek Picard is very much making up for that with insights into the Romulan way of thinking through both the introduction of the Coat Millat and via the Soji subplot aboard the Artifact. While it is not one of my go-to things in Star Trek, I do have to say that I loved the brief space battle at the end of the episode. After 3 episodes of setup in this season, a touch of action was needed, and in my opinion, the sequence was beautiful. Especially great was seeing a classic 23rd century style Romulan bird of prey rendered in crisp 21st century graphics. The final reveal of the criteria that must be met for a Coat Millat to take up a quest, that it must be a lost cause. The reveal, and the look on Jurati's face, was perfect. This is not so much a nitpick, but rather a minor annoyance. The appearance of 7 of 9 at the end of the episode was a nice surprise, even though we did know that she would be in the series at some point. However, this surprise is completely undercut by Jerry Ryan's inclusion in the opening credits. Now, I know there are complicated issues when it comes to credits and how an actor gets paid for being in an episode, but it still would have been nice to have that be a surprise, even for those viewers who watch the opening credits carefully. My final rating for Absolute Candor is 4 out of 5 stars. I really liked it. For the era of Star Trek in which the Picard series resides, it's more important than ever to clearly establish that my ratings for each episode are relative to the rest of the series, and in the case of season-long story arcs, relative to the rest of the season. This episode featured some great character work with Picard and Raffi, as well as between Picard and Elnor. The acting is top-notch. You cannot tell me that Picard's delivery of the line, "I may never pass this way again," is not heartbreaking. Jonathan Frakes does a masterful job of directing this episode and extracting great performances out of his actors. Absolute Candor is definitely one of the better episodes of Star Trek Picard's first season, and it's for that reason that it gets a 4-star rating, relative to the other episodes of the season.
Promise is a prison, Elnor. Do not make yourself another's jailer.
And that reminds me, Zani, last time I made you a promise that I would try and find some sweet Harifac. But I totally forgot that promises were prison, so...
Vashti. Man can't even take a guilt trip without using a starship.
I hate that f***ing hospitality hologram.